Welcome back, Weirds and Weebies, to the channel Doge, where today I remembered that I have a series on BTDX. Whoever said I forgot about my old series, the multiple of them that I have all abandoned. Okay, but in all seriousness, I do still really enjoy BTDX. I just rarely make videos on it because, well, to be honest, I already mentioned how in BTD6, the main thing that kind of barriers my enjoyment to it and makes it so sometimes I love it and sometimes I hate it is the fact that retry last round is only available in Challenge Editor, a feature which I feel should be in the entire game, and would certainly make just about every single challenge in the whole game 10 times less tedious. Well, BTDX, unfortunately, its biggest downside is that it's, if anything, kind of worse for that. Of course, you don't have save files in BTDX, and that can make trying to do anything particularly difficult in BTDX sometimes more frustrating than enjoyable, just because, well, you can't save. It always has to be done in one long shot, and of course, you're very rarely going to get that, so you're going to be doing a lot of restarting, which again gets pretty tedious pretty fast. All that being said, I do think that BTDX and the MOAB mod for it that we're talking about today has some really cool things that BTD6 doesn't. And so I have felt a little bit bad leaving it in the dust and not talking about it for a while, especially because the whole reason I even made a video on BTDX in the first place was literally just so I could talk about the MOAB mod, and then I only ended up making one video on the MOAB mod. So the long-awaited follow-up arrives, the Ceemerang. Now if you're asking yourself, what the fuck is a Ceemerang, then me too, buddy, no idea. I mean, I guess it's supposed to just be, oh, it's a boomerang, but it's not a boomerang, so it's a Ceemerang. But if they wanted to just change one of the letters in boomerang to turn it into something new, couldn't they have called it the Coomerang? Okay, wait, never mind, now I know why they called it the Ceemerang. Well, anyway, the Ceemerang, as you could guess by the name, is essentially like an alternate boomerang, a little bit how the darter was like an alternate dart monkey. I swear these are the only towers in this mod which are basically just alternate versions of already existing towers. The other ones are a lot more unique, I guess, in their own right. But as I say, today's video is about the Ceemerang, and I do think the Ceemerang is one of the more useful towers in the MOAB mod, so I think I'll have a decent amount to say about it. Though I will admit, at base, this tower at first seems pretty useless, and that is because the Ceemerang is, as you could guess, a boomerang. Yeah, seriously, the Ceemerang is absolutely identical to the boomerang in all ways. It costs the same, it has the same pierce, it has the same attack speed, it has the same everything. The only thing that's different is the angle at which the boomerang curves is mirrored. So yeah, as expected, not really much to write home about with the main base tower. But the main reason why the Ceemerang is interesting isn't because they just took the boomerang and copy-pasted it and hit the flip button. No, the main reason it's interesting is because all of its upgrades are completely different to the normal boomerang in BTDX. So let's make a start by tackling its first two upgrades that you have to get before you can pick a path. First up is Sonic Boom, an upgrade which is absolutely iconic to the Boomerang Monkey, but unfortunately some of you may not know about because it was actually removed in BTD6, even though every single other appearance of the Boomerang Monkey has had this upgrade ever since its introduction in BTD2. Though in fairness, that's for good reason. Sonic Boom in its original incarnation was a completely useless upgrade. Well, I say that, it might have been slightly useful back when it was first introduced in BTD2, but certainly not long afterwards, it became a useless upgrade that essentially only still existed because it was recognized as an iconic Boomerang Monkey upgrade that you had to get later upgrades anyway. Sonic Boom in the past used to be an upgrade which just allowed the Boomerang to pop frozen balloons, not even leads. It used to be a lot more common in the past for there to be towers that could only pop frozen and not lead, whereas now that's quite rare. I believe the only towers in all of BTD6 that can pop frozen but not lead are the Laser Cannon Dartling and the Laser Vision Super. Although in the past it used to be true that druids with hard thorns could only pop frozen as well until they were later buffed to be able to pop lead as well. Either way, I remember being quite sad to see Sonic Boom go, because while I was definitely in agreement this is one of the most useless upgrades in all of Bloons Tower Defense, I also felt like all it needed was a little bit of tweaking and reworking to give it some real benefit beyond just popping frozen balloons that could still fit in with the flavor of a Sonic Boom, because the boomerangs are just being thrown that fast. And so that's essentially what this upgrade does. It makes Sonic Boom, well, actually useful. Sonic Boom costs 270 cash, and it increases your pierce from 3 to 6 in BTDX. It also gives you the benefit that Ceemerangs can now pierce through shields, and of course, it gives the ability to pop frozen like it's always done. So let me explain that middle one though, being able to pierce through shields. Again, most of you who've played BTDX before will know, but I know that some people are going to be a bit out of the loop. Shielded balloons are one of the most dangerous types of balloons in BTDX. They obviously, well, have a shield, but this doesn't just increase their health, although it does do that, it also has two other gimmicks which make them deadly. One of them being that while a balloon has a shield on it, it cannot be affected by any kind of slow or debuff until the shield is broken. And that means it's really hard to stop these things in their tracks until you break open that shield. The second thing being that when a projectile hits a shielded balloon, even if that projectile was something like a Spyco pulp ball that should be hitting like 50 balloons before it runs out of pierce, if it hits a shield, it is instantly destroyed, losing all of its pierce to that one balloon. Now in fairness, this does increase the damage dealt to the shield, but it also means that if you see clumps of shielded balloons, it becomes a nightmare dealing with them all because the shields just eat up all the pierce you have and make it so you cannot attack all of them at once. What this unique effect that Sonic Boom brings to the table helps you with is it makes it so that shielded balloons are still trapped like normal balloons to the Ceemerang, meaning that the Ceemerang is allowed to go through the shielded balloons, hitting multiple of them without all of its pierce being eaten up by a single shield. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't actually directly increase your DPS to shielded balloons like I used to think it did. Unfortunately, no, your DPS against shielded balloons is exactly the same as before. It's just that now you will effectively have better shielded balloon defense because instead of the first balloon in the swarm always eating up all the pierce and protecting every balloon behind it, now you're actually able to evenly hit all the balloons in the swarm and weaken them all down. I also think, funnily enough, even though this is a pretty, normal upgrade and literally the cheapest upgrade on the tower, this is also, I believe, the only upgrade in the entire game with that effect. I don't think any other tower in all of BTDX can get the ability to pass through shields. I think this is completely exclusive to the Ceemerang Sonic Boom, which is a nice little detail. With that said, I do quite like that they kept the theme going by making the very next upgrade another old upgrade for the Boomerang which no longer exists in BT6, that being Thermite. This one was a lot more short-lived. I believe this upgrade only existed in BTD3, but in BTD3, Thermite used to be the upgrade after Sonic Boom, and it would make it so that, well, your Boomerangs could pop lead, but it didn't do anything else in that game. Now, technically, this did come back in the form of Red Hot Rangs in BT5, which obviously does the same thing. I'm just being, specific here. Technically, Thermite's a different name and it had a different visual, but you get the idea. Same idea, just simply gives lead popping. Obviously, here it does a bit more than that again. Thermite in this game works like Red Hot Rangs in BTD6. Increasing the damage of the Boomerang from 1 to 2, and of course, making them pop lead, while also having the slight extra benefit of making the Ceemerangs now arc around faster and come back to the tower in less time, making it less likely to miss. Now, low-tier Ceemerangs are decent defense for the cost, but being real, you're never going to use them unless you simply are waiting to afford one of its path upgrades. So let's start talking about them. And all cards on the table, the first path, the one on the left, is probably the weakest in my opinion. So while it might seem like I'm not giving the most praise for this path, the other two paths I'm going to have a lot more positive things to say about. That being said, the first path got some significant buffs in the final update to the MOAB mod, which certainly made it far more usable, whereas before I would have said it was a literally never touch this upgrade path kind of upgrade. The other two upgrade paths are original, but this upgrade path is essentially copied from BTD6. This is the Kylie upgrade path. The first upgrade is the Kylie Boomerangs for 1200. They work just like they do in BT6. They have a lot of pierce, they do a decent amount of damage, and they go in straight lines rather than curves. The only thing I will say is I'm pretty sure here in the MOAB mod, these Boomerangs are thrown further than they are in BTD6, which can be a blessing because, more range and more track to cover, but also can be a curse because in my experience it makes it really hard to get long straight lines when you throw them this far. I would usually talk a little bit more about each individual upgrade, but I mean, you already know what Kylies are all about, you already know what you use them for, so I feel like there's not really much explanation to be done here. They're Kylies, they do what you already know they do from BTD6. Where things start to get a little bit different from BTD6, while still obviously trying to copy the idea, is MOAB Press, which you might be surprised to see only costs 1,800 in-game cash. Now that might seem at first like it's broken. I mean, you know how good MOAB Press is in BTD6, and that MOAB Press costs just over 2,000. This only costs 1,800. That seems insane, right? Well, the MOAB Press in this game frankly fucking sucks. I could be incorrect here, but I'm pretty sure this used to be a good amount more expensive before the final update, so I imagine that it's made this cheap on purpose because they realized how much worse the MOAB Press was in this game compared to BTD6. You see, the problem with the MOAB Press in this game is that in BTD6, the MOAB Press sort of seeks a little. When you throw a MOAB Press Boomerang, it'll steer itself into the MOAB it's supposed to be pushing back and stay on top of that MOAB until the projectile expires. Whereas in this game, when it throws a MOAB Pressing Boomerang every now and then, while it does knock back MOABs and do good damage to them, it only knocks them back while it's touching them. And it goes right through the MOABs and out the other end of them if you don't get them to stop right on top of them with some amazing, like, you know, perfect angle. And that very rarely happens, especially, as I mentioned, because they throw the boomerang so far. They go across like half the screen, and I'm pretty sure that the point at which they stop is outside the range of the tower itself, meaning that without luck involved, it's basically impossible to line up a MOAB Press which will have 100% uptime on the knockback of its effect. It will only push the MOAB back a little bit as it goes through it, and then once it pops out the other end of it, it's no longer dealing damage or knocking it back. Meaning that these MOAB Press things end up doing way less damage and way less knockback than they could be doing if they were making sure to always stay on top of the MOABs they were supposed to be pushing back. So MOAB Press is just a lot weaker in this game. Now, in fairness, now that it's also cheaper in this game, it's not the worst option. You can make it work, and hey, if you've got a really long straight line on a track, go ahead, knock yourself out. But certainly, as you can tell, I don't really recommend this upgrade. At the very least, if I do recommend using it in any situation, I would say, of course, long straight line to shoot down, plus you need to deal with lots of group MOABs is probably the best situation for it. Because in fairness, it does end up being a lot more effective in a real game compared to Sandbox, when there are loads of MOABs on screen just about everywhere. In that case, of course, no matter where the MOAB Press Boomerang ends up, it's probably going to be pushing back some kind of MOAB at some position. But certainly for situations where there are only 2 or 3 MOABs on screen to deal with, yeah, it's just quite rough trying to use this upgrade. And that brings us to the final upgrade on this path, MOAB Domination for 7,200. A decent amount cheaper than it is in BTD6. In fairness, that's partially because upgrades in this game are not a whole lot, but a little bit cheaper than in BTD6. A lot of the 5th tiers aren't quite as expensive as you see in BTD6, although still very expensive. But on top of that, the MOAB Domination in this game is not as intense in power level, which obviously explains why it's so cheap. MOAB Domination in this game also doesn't really work the same way it does in BTD6. It doesn't have the exploding rangs or anything. All this upgrade simply does is give you more damage, more attack speed, and makes it so the boomerangs that actually push back MOABs are thrown far more often. With the original MOAB Press upgrade, they're only thrown every now and then, whereas with MOAB Domination, they're thrown all the time. This upgrade also gives you a new ability, although it's a pretty simple one. It literally is just that if you click the tower when the ability bar is full, it will throw a whole bunch of MOAB Press Boomerangs all at once in a row. It's not a super strong ability, but the tower's base power is already high enough to kind of justify the price tag enough, so it's not too bad. It's kind of just an extra on top. In fact, you see that a decent amount in BTDX. There's a lot more ability towers that are actually more about the tower, but they just have an ability tacked on as a little bonus. So, is the MOAB Domination good in any situation? It's okay, I think, but once again, I wouldn't go for it. It's certainly a lot easier to stomach buying this now that it doesn't have a 5-digit price tag. And honestly, it's a little bit hard to say, but this price being affordable in mid-game might make it so this tower is actually pretty decent right now, and I might be underrating it. It's a bit hard to say. I get such mixed results when I use this tower. Seriously, I know it probably isn't the case, but I feel like whenever I use this tower, half the time it's just rolling dice to calculate how much damage it will do. I genuinely am still trying to figure out how. I swear one time while testing this tower, I clicked the ability button and I swear I watched it one-shot an entire zombie. And I obviously thought, oh shit, I've been like underrating this tower, it's so good. But then I have not gotten that to happen once ever again. I can only assume it must not have actually been the MOAB Domination and something else on the map must have done like a burst of damage out of nowhere. But at the time, the MOAB Domination was my main DPS option, so I really don't know what caused the zombie to just absolutely explode. When I actually try in Sandbox to use this ability for burst damage, it actually looks like, if anything, it's kinda pitiful. Yeesh. Really not holding its own all too well there, is it? You can see why I'm definitely having a hard time figuring out whether there are things I can recommend this upgrade path for. Essentially what I'm thinking is that whenever I test this tower, whenever I sit down in Sandbox and see, okay, how does it do against this? How does it do against this? How does it do against this? It constantly disappoints me, and it looks like an almost useless upgrade path. And yet when I sit down in the game, don't get me wrong, it doesn't blow me away, but it feels okay when I actually sit down and use it in a normal game. It feels like it gets enough done, and it feels like it's kind of reasonably priced and not too hard to get to. So once again, it could just be the fact that having more balloons on screen in a real game compared to a sandbox test really is just the difference maker for this tower. It's really hard for me to put my finger on, but either way, I'm not going to lose too much sleep over it, because I can pretty conclusively say that this upgrade path is definitely the weakest of the three, because even if this upgrade path is better than I think, I would still say it's average at best. A lot of what I'm trying to figure out here is just, okay, is it average or is it awful? Because it lies somewhere in between average and awful, I just don't know where. Just before we move on to the next upgrade path, I'd like to cut in and just say, well, this voiceover is being recorded later, and I've now obviously had to record all the footage that you're seeing for this video, which means I've played some more games. And I'm genuinely starting to be moved a little bit more on this upgrade path. I'm starting to think maybe it is kind of good. It's, again, really hard to say. I feel like the reason why I have such a negative impression of this upgrade path is because of the fact that every single time I test it in Sandbox, it's just so underwhelming. But I can't lie, using it in these real games, while whenever I get one of them, it isn't enough, it's also relatively cheap. And so usually I can get one to start, and then once I have money, start getting more of them, and more of them, and more of them. And you can just kind of spam them. And it just seems like spamming these is a surprisingly effective strategy. Because, you know, when you play a game of chimps in BTD6, usually saving up for your 5th tier is the hardest part of the run, because, you know, you have to survive with like 40,000 unspent cash or something like that. Whereas here, because you just get to spam a whole bunch of MOAB Doms, and that's actually like a good strategy, it means you don't really have many tough points in the run, because you practically always have something you can be dumping your money into. It's also really effective just generally because, in my opinion, the Village and the Alchemist are both really, really powerful in this game, and so they kind of encourage you to place more towers to get more benefit. And so I feel like tower spam is more rewarded in BTDX than maybe in BTD6, and maybe that's just the adjustment I need to make, is to realize it's fine for me to spam this tower, because honestly, when I do spam this tower, it is extremely powerful. And again, the fact that it's just not that expensive up front seems to make it quite easy to stomach being able to get there in the first place. Now, the only reason why I'm still a little bit hesitant is because so far I've mostly been playing on intermediate and beginner maps just because that's a bit less stressful. And I could imagine on a lot of the particularly hard maps, while it might be nice that you don't have to worry about these big thresholds where you have to save up tens of thousands of cash before you can get the next upgrade, you are still going to have to deal with a tower that mostly wants to attack down straight lines on maps that are probably going to be winding every which direction all over the place. But even that being said, I would say that the expert maps in this game are kind of split into two categories, where a lot of them are either multi-lane maps that, in my opinion, are extremely difficult, but a lot of the expert maps that are a little bit on the easy side, if you ask me, are maps that are more just extremely short and usually just like one straight line. And yeah, it's short, or maybe there's not a lot of space for towers and that's supposed to make it difficult, but often these maps, in my opinion, aren't as hard as the multi-lane maps. Either way, the game still considers them expert maps, and in fairness, so long as you have enough space to spam these things, I imagine they would also be effective on those expert maps. So it makes me wonder if really, maybe I am being too harsh on this upgrade path. One last little thing I'd also like to add, since I'm already recording this extra section, is I also discovered a little bit of a synergy while getting footage for this video, which I hadn't tried before. You see, while I've already played vanilla BTDX, I didn't literally unlock everything in the vanilla game before I moved to the MOAB mod. So while I do focus on the MOAB mod in these videos, sometimes I do discover new things about the original game as well while I'm playing. And most of those things that I discover are the secret unlockable upgrade paths, because I practically did not unlock a single one of these before jumping to the MOAB mod, so almost every secret upgrade path that I've been playing with is one that I've only found now that I'm playing the MOAB mod, even if it was also there in BTDX, the original. And that includes the secret path for the village, the blacksmith, which not only powers up all the projectiles of all the towers in its range, but also increases the size of them, making them have larger hitboxes. And I think this is not only an extremely powerful upgrade, but but also an upgrade which really helps out the MOAB Press. Again, its biggest issue is that it flies so far and at such a quick speed that it usually goes right through a MOAB while barely moving it backwards. And so it having a larger hitbox, while it doesn't instantly fix the issue, does mean it usually spends a lot more time actually doing increased damage to MOABs and actually pushing them back, which really does a lot to help the effectiveness of the tower. So yeah, it seems to me like this might be a little bit better than I'm giving it credit for, because I'm already getting a village basically every single game I play because I think it's just that good in BTDX. And well, if I'm getting villages, I get more benefits the more towers I have. And, well, Kylie's are just such a spammable tower. They do great damage against group balloons, they do good damage against MOABs. The only problem they'd have is that sometimes they don't do enough damage against MOABs, and the only way to fix that problem is to just get more of them. And it seems like just about every single village path in the game has great synergy with this strategy. The left path village, of course, gives them camo detection, which they need because, well, they can't see camo without it. But also, Call to Arms, as you can imagine, works really, really well with these. The middle path village is probably the only one that doesn't have a whole bunch of synergy with these boomerangs, but it does provide them damage resistance, which means they're less likely to be stunned for quite as long. The right path not only gives them +2 pierce and +30% attack speed instead of +1 and 15%, but also later on can start recharging the abilities of all the MOAB dominations faster, or even just instantly recharge all of them at a press of a button if you get it all the way to 5th tier. And of course, this extra secret path, the blacksmith, has the best synergy of all in my opinion. So long as the map doesn't have multiple lanes and allows you to cram all your defense in one spot, I'm honestly kind of becoming convinced that I have underrated this upgrade path and it is better than I think. I do make an effort to learn as much as I can about the upgrades before I make these videos, but sometimes it's just really hard to tell how good they are really in BTDX specifically, because, well, when you try to use them in a real game, a lot of these upgrades aren't good enough to solo and need other upgrades to help them out. And often, by the late game, it becomes really difficult to tell how much work the tower you're actually trying to show off is doing, and how much work all the support is doing. And that's why I defer so much to sandbox testing a lot of the time to figure out if a tower is good or not. But I mean, as I've kept saying, clearly in this situation, sandbox testing makes this tower look a lot more awful than it actually is. There's just so many incidental little things that happen in a real game that don't happen in a sandbox game that make this tower so convenient. With all that said, I think I've spent long enough on this tangent, so let's get back to the middle path. Now, I think that's enough negativity. You see, I do feel a little bit bad. Obviously, the very first upgrade path I talk about with this tower that I said I like, I'm basically trashing it. I especially feel bad considering, even though it was months ago, the last video I did on the first tower in this series, the Data, I also had generally negative things to say about most of the paths. But here's where I can finally start getting a little bit more enthusiastic. Because the middle path was the first upgrade path in this mod I really fell in love with. And it was easy to get into, especially considering already by the first upgrade it was impressing me, with the A.I.B. The A.I.B is an upgrade which costs 1,450, and, well, in short, it's basically Glaive Ricochet. Now you might be thinking, why would I care about that? If it's just Glaive Ricochet, why wouldn't I just get a Glaive Ricochet? Well, as you didn't know, Glaive Ricochet in BTDX is a little bit different. For one, the Boomerang monkey in BTDX does not have red hot rangs, so you're forced to get a Glaive Ricochet which does 1 damage and has no attack speed boosts. As well as that, the Glaive Ricochet in BTDX has a little bit of a bonus thing, where once it runs out of targets to ricochet to, it just starts bouncing all around the screen instead of just stopping. Which, to be honest, I'm kind of surprised that the BT6 Glaive Ricochet doesn't do this, because I mean, that's what a ricochet is. It's kind of funny, you know, you don't think about it all that much, but the official way that Glaive Ricochet works isn't even really how ricochets actually work, but you know what, let's just forget about that, get out of that rabbit hole, move on. Now, the A.I.B does cost 250 cash more than the Glaive Ricochet in BTDX, but it is far more effective. As I say, the Glaive Ricochet in BTDX can't pop lead and can only do 1 damage per hit. And really the only upside it gets is sometimes it bounces off the screen and hits a bit more balloons. Whereas the A.I.B will be dealing double damage with every single one of its ricochets and can pop lead. Not to mention, it also still has the bonus against shielded balloons that Sonic Boom provided, meaning that the A.I.B is basically the best option in the entire game against group shielded balloons, and it certainly is a huge relief to have it on your side if you're really worried about that kind of thing. This is absolutely a mid-game carry tower, which is able to deal with huge swaths of balloons, even up to relatively high tiers. Obviously, once you start getting to brick balloons and MOABs, you're going to start actually finally crumbling. But until you get to that point, the A.I.B genuinely has some insane damage output for cost and is so efficient and satisfying to watch it work. And just when you think the A.I.B may have met its limit, because now it's finally having to deal with higher tier balloons like brick balloons, and it's kind of starting to lose some ground, you get the A.I.B squared. For 3,200, all this does is very simply act as a bionic boomer upgrade, but on a different upgrade path, tripling the attack speed of the A.I.B. So essentially, an A.I.B squared is like a 3-3-2 boomerang in BTD6, if that could be a thing that existed. A glaive ricochet bionic boomer who also deals double damage and pops lead. This leads to some absolute balloon shreddage. Seriously, having this thing on the screen essentially means nothing below a MOAB can exist for longer than 2 seconds without being eviscerated anymore. And while it's not cheap, for the amount of power you get, it's very, very good in costs. The only upgrade on the middle path I have any complaints about is the final upgrade, the Orbirang Lord. And in fairness, even then, I'm being a little bit picky. In fairness, the Orbirang Lord is not the most expensive 5th tier, at only 7,500. And of course, it's already on a very good upgrade path, so every now and then you'll just get it anyway, because you already wanted an A.I.B squared. And maybe later you're just like, well, I want to make it stronger. I'm not the biggest fan of Orbirang Lord, but this tower is here. I do want to make it better. It's already doing a good job. I may as well do it. But either way, the Orbirang Lord does something quite simple. For one, it makes the tower attack even faster, but not by a huge margin. Still, it leads to more damage, but the other thing it does is it now has 3 boomerangs which orbit around it at different radiuses. It's not quite the same as the Glaive Lord, though it's clearly inspired by it, because the 3 boomerangs aren't just in one big circle, they're all in different sized circles that spin at different ranges, with the widest one out being nearly at the full max range of the tower. The Orbirang Lord can finally deal with up to low tier MOABs, but yeah, this is why it kind of disappoints me. The A.I.B squared already is enough to deal with basically any amount of non-MOAB class balloon, with only the absolute strongest of non-MOAB balloons really posing a threat to it. The Orbirang Lord, for more than double the cost, does do more. In fact, it finally is able to deal with mini-MOABs in huge clumps as well, but it can't even deal with a normal MOAB yet. It still doesn't do a whole lot of damage. Its single target is still abysmal, and again, I know it's not made for single target, it's made for, multi-target. But for an upgrade this expensive, I thought that maybe at least a MOAB would be something it could deal with, but no, it really is just kind of overkill. Again, it's not that it's weak, it's just the A.I.B squared already does so much group balloon damage. I'm not sure if you really want to spend 7,500 more on getting even more group balloon damage, because in my experience, you basically never need more group balloon damage than you already get with the A.I.B squared. So it's not even necessarily that the Orbirang Lord is all that bad or anything, it's just that what it provides more of is something you already have more than enough and you will never need more of from the last upgrade, which is a decent amount cheaper. So while the Orbirang Lord isn't really worth it, the middle path in total, with its 2 A.I.B upgrades, is one of the best mid-game carries you're going to get in BTDX, and I absolutely love using this upgrade path and making it so the middle of the game becomes easy to coast through and an absolute joy to watch get shredded. This brings us to its final and probably most unique upgrade path, the Nomad path. I'm not sure if this will initially be received as impressive or underwhelming. Certainly, I kinda didn't know how to feel about this tower, whether it was amazing or garbage when I first saw it. But the Nomad is obviously the first upgrade on this path. It's the cheapest of the options you have for your first upgrade on a path, costing only 470, and what does it do? Well, the upgrade says that all it does is chases balloons. But what does that mean? It means the tower's actually allowed to leave the spot you place it. It literally walks away from the spot you placed it and, well, chases the balloons. Now, it does seem to have a limit. It seems incapable of walking to any distance that's outside the range of the initial placement of the tower. And as well as that, although it's generally pretty good about using this enormously increased range to catch all balloons, there are some times where the AI for its chasing will let you down. Now, I'm kind of guessing here, so I could be a little bit wrong here, but from what I've played with this tower, it looks like this is how the AI works. Initially, before anything's happened, the tower can only see within the range you see when you hover over it. But then it finds a target and it starts chasing it. And that range, that ring around the tower when you hover over it, that follows where the monkey is running. And so as the monkey moves away from the center, that means that it can now see further outside the ring of the initial range. While this does massively increase your range, sometimes the Nomad won't make use of this. For instance, when I use this tower on Badlands, sometimes this tower could reach the middle lane and sometimes it couldn't. And I think the reason for that is, if it had already chased a balloon that was near the middle lane, and that brought it closer to the middle lane, then it could see the balloons in the middle lane and go chase them out, and then it would have range to them. However, if it was on the left side of the screen to begin, then it wouldn't even see the balloons on the middle path to begin with in the first place, so it wouldn't think to chase them. I think it can only acquire an initial target to chase from within the range of the base tower. So that's why sometimes it can be a bit inconsistent. That being said, this upgrade does make the effective range of the Ceemerang absolutely huge, which means it's quite a powerful upgrade on the more expert maps in the game, which make it really awkward to get defenses on all lanes. That being said, of course, the Nomad still doesn't have the best DPS, even if it's usually serviceable, and on top of that, it's still kind of inconsistent. You gotta kind of hope the AI goes in the right directions, and that obviously can backfire. Me from the future again, when I was recording this bit, I completely forgot if the Nomad could actually see camo or not, because while I remembered it attacking camo balloons, I just so happened to be getting a camo village anyway in a lot of my games, so I didn't remember if that was actually because the Nomad could see camo or not. And as it turns out, yeah, it can see camo. And since it can already pop lead thanks to Thermite, that means that Nomad, just like Stat-Eye Darts, is now another one of the cheapest options in the game you have for camo lead defense, which is really convenient and even better for expert maps on more difficult, well, difficulties. Now, in fairness, all that being said, if you're playing a map where you don't need a tower that moves to cover all the lanes, then Stat-Eye Darts almost certainly still wins out. It costs about the same amount, it has far better stalling power, it is really good single target, it's about as good multi-target. Honestly, the only situations where Stat-Eye Darts loses is that thanks to Sonic Boom, Nomad is probably better against grouped shielded balloons, and also Nomad is probably better again on these multi-lane maps. But if you're talking single lane maps, and if you're talking normal circumstances where you don't have to worry that much about shielded balloons, then Stat-Eye Darts is going to be the better option for cheap camo-led defense early on in the game. Once again, why I kind of characterize a lot of the upgrades in this path as really powerful, but mostly only if you're sweating. So for more consistent defense, you want better Boomerangs. This upgrade is, I'll put it this way. I mean, this is kind of true of the whole upgrade path, but this upgrade in particular is a sweaty one. I think if you're tryharding and you're trying to take on an extremely difficult map in this game, this is actually one of the best upgrades in the entire game. However, it's so micro-attentive to use this upgrade effectively that certainly in your normal runs, you're probably not going to be opting for it. Better Boomerangs cost 2,300 and gives multiple benefits. For one, it gives a cash drain ability where you now actually earn money by popping balloons, which, as a reminder to those who missed it, in BTDX, unfortunately you do not earn money for popping balloons, you get all your money at the end of a round. The only way you can get money for popping balloons is by getting towers with cash draining abilities. Now, the better Boomerang's cash drain is unfortunately one of the weakest cash drains in the game. It does make you money, but it doesn't make you money very fast. That being said, it is cheaper than other cash drain options to initially get in the first place, and it is better early game defense than a lot of cash drain options, so you're still going to be resorting to it as an income option on harder maps a lot more often. Alongside the cash drain, you also get double rangs. So now instead of just throwing one Ceemerang that goes one way, now whenever it attacks it throws two Boomerangs that both arc both different directions. Finally though, the main reason why better Boomerangs is a bit of a sweaty upgrade but one that is extremely powerful, especially on expert maps, is because it now gives you the option to have full manual of control of where the Nomad goes with full map range. Essentially, you've just turned your Boomerang into a heli that also just so happens to be making money the more things it attacks. While the firepower of this upgrade for the cost is not very much, obviously you can see how on any expert map this tower is a godsend. Having full map range that you can send wherever you want on a tower with decent ability to pop normal balloons lead popping, and it gets money for popping balloons on top of all that. Once again, I wouldn't use this as your main source of income, but it's certainly effective as your first source of income just to get you sort of stable, and then once you've made enough money from the better boomerangs to start getting some farms, then use the farms as your main source of income. Though, once again, I've got to say, while the first 2 upgrades on this path I highly recommend for any more sweaty runs on this game, the last one I think is a little bit more niche. Once again, like the Orbirang Lord, the 5th tier is just a little bit too much in my opinion. The final upgrade is the MX Sandchimp. And once again, I think there are some situations where you might want to buy it simply because better boomerangs is so good that you might want to get the Sandchimp just because you want a better boomerangs and you already have one, and hey, you may as well get it. That being said, I don't think you'll be going out of your way to get this upgrade often. The MX Sandchimp costs 6,500 and increases your attack speed. That's it. Oh, you think I'm joking? Well, okay, maybe I am, because there is one ability tied to it, but for the most part, that's essentially the whole tower. All it does is it makes you attack faster with the tower that you already had. And don't get me wrong, it's not an insignificant attack speed boost, but it's not really an impressive one either. I imagine it's supposed to be because most of the power of this tower is in its ability. But I think I kind of disagree. The ability is quite simple. It is a full map range instant heal to all towers. Now, once again, for any of you who haven't caught up on all the BTDX videos, you might be a bit confused. What do you mean heal? Well, essentially, in BTDX, there are multiple types of balloons you see in the late game that are able to fight back against your towers. Now, they don't literally destroy them or kill them, they stun them. And without heals, it takes a long time for the towers to get unstunned. And so there are a decent amount of towers in this game which have the ability to heal other towers stunned to have them recover from being stunned faster. And while this sounds useful, unfortunately, in my experience, while it is generally a smart idea to always have one form of stun healing at the very least in every single defense, at the same time, maybe this is just me, maybe I'm undervaluing heal, but in my experience playing BTDX, I'm honestly kind of confused with how many heal upgrades there are in the game. I mean, for God's sake, we literally have a whole tower in the MOAB mod that is supposed to do nothing but heal towers. And I kind of like the idea, but I never actually use it. Because quite frankly, I feel like all you need to do is get one half-decent healing option, and there you go, you're set for literally the entire game. In my experience, I've never needed really more than a single alchemist throwing heal potions, or a single porcupine throwing healing spines or whatever. I've never really had to go all in on getting an expensive heal option that's supposed to be more powerful than the others. Now, I definitely can see how the Sandchimp can be useful, because one of the only downsides of healing towers in this game is that the healing towers themselves can be stunned. And if that happens and they get stuck in a stun lock, you can be kind of screwed, because, I mean, it can't heal itself. And if there's no one else to heal the healing tower, then no one's going to get healed from any stuns now. They're just going to have to wait for the stun to wear off, and usually that's going to be too long. They're going to die in the process. And so don't get me wrong, I can see how an ability like this could be really useful. You just click the button and every tower on the screen is instantly healed of their stun. It sounds like it could in theory be useful. I just feel like stuns in this game aren't enough of a threat to actually justify the existence of an upgrade like this, which does so little on its own and provides an ability which is realistically so expensive. Now, even all that being said, I am saying in general this upgrade is not worth the cost, and if you're really tryharding, I wouldn't be getting it. But I would also like to add in, I still buy this upgrade from time to time. One, just because better boomerangs is such a good tower, sometimes I think it's just nice having the faster attacking better boomerangs on the screen. And two, because while the heal ability has never actually been needed or necessary for me, it is a nice peace of mind knowing that if I do get stuck in a stun lock, then I do just have a button to instantly save my run when I would have died guaranteed otherwise. As I say, I've used this tower a lot. I have done multiple full runs of this game using this tower, and I have literally never once gotten any real use out of the ability, because I've just never needed a full map heal. Now, you could argue maybe that's because I'm getting healing towers anyway, and I should try getting no healing towers and using the MX Sandchimp as my main heal. That just sounds like I'm shooting myself in the foot for no reason, because the other healing tower options are cheaper than the Sandchimp, and they're consistent. They're not based on an ability, so they're up all the time. Besides, in the case of the Alchemist, which is usually my healing option, I'm usually getting the Alchemist for the attack speed buffs, and the healing is just a bonus. So I kind of would want to get that anyway, even if I was going to use the Sandchimp as my main healing option. I don't know, I'm very mixed on this upgrade, as you can probably tell, just because I feel like it's not necessarily the Sandchimp's fault. I feel like it's more the fault of the game that stuns in general just aren't enough of a threat to warrant all these healing upgrades in the game that are so expensive. Again, I only really tend to get the cheaper healing upgrades, or healing upgrades that precede other upgrades which provide more useful buffs. But all that being said, that is the Ceemerang. As I say, I think this is quite a useful tower. While I do think that the first path is near useless, I do think that the middle path is one of the best mid-game carries in the game, and I think that the right path of the Nomad monkey is one of the best options in the game for trying to sweat high difficulty maps.